Thanks very much, Lynn. I think coming last does give me the dubious honour, though, of being between a really good day and beer o'clock, so bear with me. But it is a great honour for both myself personally and Carbon Neutral to be invited to partner today. I think, as I've said to a few people already, I've just got to pinch myself. Dr. Mark Alch and I have been meeting for coffee every probably 6 months for the last 6-7 years, having first met Mark way back in 2001 when he was in Meekatha and we were at Berengara. But here we are, and it's been a fabulous day. I don't know about you, but always the night after a very interesting day, I can't sleep because my brain's just going flat out trying to process everything. Lessons learnt. I guess two big takeaways from lessons learnt is that a tonne of carbon is not a tonne of carbon. And the second bit is to not rely on government policy or legislation to survive in business. I don't know whether it was a moment of madness or a sort of romantic notion to follow my ancestors back out in the station country, but that's us as a young family, very enthusiastic and excited to be out at Berengara. We moved out there at the end of 2000, and you can see what 15 years does to you. But within 3 months, in a 200 millimetre rainfall zone, we had 350 mil. So by February, the landscape just exploded, and it was just extraordinary in the colours and the smells, and it was just overwhelming. And the stock almost overnight, you know, the condition, they were just dripping in condition. Even the sheepdogs were just outstanding with them. And it just showed me what real biodiversity looks like. But coming from a farming background, west of Three Springs, annual pastures, you know, every winter we'd get beautiful green feed and then dry summers. Well, here we were in February, and literally you couldn't walk through it. And as I say, everything was just outstanding with what they call top cover, middle cover and ground cover. But unfortunately, as has been explained a bit today, historically the resource has been depleted. And within too long, it was like that. I mean, that's not a photo of Berengara, but it's just a pictorial thing of how quickly things disappeared. I'm probably talking a year, maybe a bit longer. My memory's a little bit shady these days, going to be that far, but it was really tough really quickly. We bred 6,000 ewes, I think, in 2002, and we marked 100 lambs. It was devastating. The family moved back to Perth. I sort of commuted, and really we were sort of left wondering what to do. And it's really quite familiar, some of the goings on of PJ today, that we had Hugh Pringle and Ken Tinley back out our way in those days, along with Mark Alchin. And it was all about slowing the water down. And when you're presented with a landscape like that, and that's, as I said, just a pictorial effort, it is overwhelming about the job ahead, but maybe carbon can pay for it. So the carbon industry in the last, well, I guess since about 2007, we've felt a bit like that polar bear. We're sort of looking around where the support was coming from, where the policy direction was coming from, and really what do we do? We're surrounded by confusion and the unknown. And it's been mentioned already, but I just thought it'd be good to chuck up just the dog's breakfast that we've been presented with since, I guess, 2010. So there's what, at least 6 or 7 major changes there in the industry stuff. And I don't know about you, but I don't think any industry can survive that. You know, if the live export industry had what happened to them a couple of years ago every other year, it would just be devastating. So there's no wonder that carbon's sort of been on the nose. However, there's huge opportunity, and way back in, I think it was about this time, 2009, we won a substantial contract with the ACT government to offset one of their dams. So that was a $20 million deal over 30 years. So back in the early days, there was the opportunity to present your story and get these type of contracts. And as we've heard already today, there has been opportunities under the regulatory scheme. The government's had $2.55 billion available. Most of it's already gone, and Freddie's taken advantage of some of that, which is fantastic. But only 13 projects in WA. So I think there was 368 earlier on that happened in those first 3 auctions, but only 13 in WA. So missed opportunity. However, because of that dog's breakfast before, as a company, we decided to not follow the government policy, government legislation. We actually went for the voluntary market. And the voluntary market is pure marketing. It's not to say that carbon hasn't been sequestered, because it's a very rigorous process, which I'll explain later. But basically, it's that a tonne of carbon is not a tonne of carbon. So you may have heard of Austral Fisheries, one of Australia's most successful seafood companies. They catch the Patagonian toothfish 4,000 kilometres southwest of Perth. It's absolutely outstanding fish. We had it with them up at our farms a couple of weeks ago. They brand it as Glacier 51. But they've come up with this carbon neutral fish. So they're the first seafood company in the world to be carbon neutral. And there's not a lot of time to go into it, but basically one of the things I asked David Carter, the CEO, now he's well known for his forward thinking and being ahead of the pack and product differentiation, all that, but he's been working really closely with the conservation groups right from the start. So WWF, Sea Shepherd, Australian Nature Conservancy, they were all there at the launch, and they applaud what these guys do. It's a fantastic local story based here in Perth, half owned by Kalis and the other half Japanese owned. So I asked David, why did you choose to voluntarily spend a heap of money with us over the next 5 years to sequester, to store, to suck the emissions from your fleet and other areas into our trees? I'll let you quickly read that. And I really want to focus on this social licence to operate. To me, that's the key thing. And Marketing 101 is about telling your story. And that's where I get back to saying a tonne of carbon is not a tonne of carbon. I mean, of course it is. It's a CO2 equivalent, whether it's methane capture or landfill waste or avoided deforestation. It all comes back to that CO2 equivalent. But the social licence to operate works both ways. At the moment, there's a market in Europe that will not take canola from Australia unless it's branded, like the carbon emissions associated with growing that canola is there. And David said for him that's the absolute key, and plus the story that we've got behind how we grow our trees. And it works both ways with what PJ mentioned. There's no good getting a carbon project up if it's all about mesquite, just a forest of mesquite, because the buyer's going to go out there one day and have a look at this beautiful carbon project and it's just a big woody weed. So social, as I said, social licence to operate goes both ways. So for us, with our biodiverse model, our multi-species, which we chose deliberately, we didn't go down the monoculture route, and we're not a pack of greenies or tree huggers, even though I have been seen hugging trees, but we chose the multi-species, 40 to 50 species, trying to replicate what was there before. I'd seen it back up at Berengarra Station with all those beautiful rains, so I knew that we could do it. And we're focusing basically, as I'll show in a bit, in the Midwest area on freehold title country. And besides the biomass, we're just looking at soil carbon, so I'm going to interrogate Sam tomorrow and tomorrow night. But we've also got the opportunity to offer biodiversity and conservation offsets. So as most of you hopefully should know, the southwest of Western Australia is one of only 34 internationally renowned biodiversity hotspots. So I think it's, correct me Lynn if I'm wrong, but 60% of our flora is unique just to WA, let alone Australia or the rest of the world. On an international scale, it is phenomenal. So we've got the opportunity to offer that to some companies that are interested in that, or individuals. Because we grow mixed species, and it's an acacia woodland, so acacia is the natural host for sandalwood. So we've got Australian sandalwood all through our plantings. It's excluded from carbon. We don't count it as carbon. It's only a couple of tonne a hectare anyway. And so in 15, 20 years' time, it's a whole enterprise in itself in this region. And we hope to one day actually have a manufacturing, up there in the towns. Irrigated products, because we're now got about 20,000 hectares under our control, we've actually decided to buy our properties, which is, it's a bit of a shame in terms of how much capital it soaks up, because it leaves us less money to grow trees. But anyway, we decided to do that to give us a little bit more control, and plus it's made available some underground water supplies that we've discovered, and growing some irrigated products, Manuka honey being one of them. Grazing, up till now we've been adjusting all our neighbours' sheep, mainly between the months of July and December, just to keep that fuel load down, but it also offers them a feed gap at certain times when it gives their properties a rest. But we're looking at getting back to sheep as well, and I neglected to mention that I've pretty much been wool blind all my life, and that's one of the reasons why we did go up to Barangara. I was going to have these visions of growing 10,000 sheep of the soft rolling skin product and all this organic meat and all the rest of it. But anyway, hopefully we'll still do that on our properties now. Beekeeping. Beekeeping is a unknown activity actually in WA. In the 60s it was huge, and it still is, but it's very typical also of agriculture where it's an ageing demographic. A lot of the beekeepers now are in their 60s and 70s, and it appears the younger generation don't really want to get into it because it's a full-on job, but it's a fascinating thing. If you ever get into bees, of those of you who do know about bees, they are just an incredible little insect, and we've already got our first harvest of honey, which we all got a jar of the other day, which is just fantastic. Bush foods is the real sleeper. So the Indigenous folk have lived off it for 40,000 years, and we're only just cottoning on now to how valuable it is in terms of nutrition and protein and whatnot. So that's going to be a good one for us. And of course, eco and cultural tourism is there as an added bonus. So when I say a tonne of carbon is not a tonne of carbon, we are growing a tonne of carbon, but with that tonne of carbon become all these other products along the way. And I'm not saying that you can do all this out in the rangelands, but because it's a voluntary market, we can all be very creative with what we do. And I mean, Outback Carbon, how sexy is that? You know, it's a great product, and carbon is a product. That's what we regard it as, just like grains and meat and wool. So sell it as that, tell your story, and away you go. So just quickly, that's basically what we're confronted with when we start. This photo was taken, I think, sort of between 2 and 3 years. The country does respond really quickly. This is quite deep York gum, red sandy loam. With the York gum, the predominant species, we actually plant them as seedlings because they are very hard to grow in the nursery with direct seeding because the seeds are so small. But everything else you see in that is direct seeded. Bush tucker, just a quick example of that, and here's the beekeeper. We've got Clayton Lewis here. He reminds me that Chris Lewis, the former Eagles star, is his brother, not that Clayton is Chris's brother. So, but anyway, Clayton's a direct descendant of the Widdy clan, and I'd like to acknowledge the Mullawar, Wadjuri, the Emagoo and the Widdy mob as the three groups that used to inhabit our area, and some of them are still there. Clayton's tickle pink to be back on country, and he's also our Indigenous sort of reconciliation plan coordinator, if you like, but he's our budding apiarist, and we're all learning the sticks, but he's the man on the ground, and really enjoying it. Grazing, as I said, another opportunity for us to get into, and as far as the marketing concept goes about telling a story, we've got this Yarra Yarra Biodiversity Corridor concept, and it is a marketing concept, but it's actually real on the ground as well. So with our plantings here signified with the orange, there's a couple of more dots there now, but basically we are, along with neighbours' remnant vegetation, we are joining up with some of these nature reserves from almost following the Irwin River catchment all the way through to Charles Darwin Nature Reserve. And it's to help reduce that friction through the landscape with the flora and fauna. And this particular concept just goes down so well with the city folk. They get it. They can understand that carbon's all a bit thing, but you present that and they really like it. Absolute key to the whole operation is getting correct certification or accreditation. And we chose the international well-known gold standard. It's WWF based from Geneva, and besides carbon being the absolute critical thing to sequester, they put a value on all those other benefits, direct benefits that come from a project. So originally a lot of their stuff was do no harm, so in other words they would never accredit a mesquite carbon project, but with our project we tick all the boxes, along with their version 3, which is following the United Nations 17 Sustainability Development Goals. So our project's the first in Australia, and I think it still is the first project in Australia, and it's a really important milestone for us because we are now exporting carbon. We've exported to the UK and to America. So they really love the whole story behind it, and we can really market it well. And I guess just to finish, bring it back to a personal level, and I think ever since I started in this game, I've never regarded any other companies as being competitors. I really do believe that the task at hand is so enormous that we need everyone to get into it, and it sort of brings back memories now of some familiar faces here from my day back out in the station country, and really it gets down to people and it gets down to the environment, and if we can all just, as I say, put our shoulder to the wheel and get into it, we'll be a much better place. Thank you.
Hear to that.